Hey, this is Chris. Well, we finally got into the Old Covenant, so we're going to get started on that. First thing we're going to talk about, and the only thing in this video we're going to talk about, are the two parties of the Old Covenant. Remember that our definition of the covenant says that, and it's a biblically derived definition, so we're going to test that, right? There's two parties. The two parties are Israel and God. That was pretty easy, wasn't it? So God has heard the cries of his people. He gets Moses. He, at the encounter of the burning bush, tells Moses what he's going to do. Fast forward to Mount Sinai. Israel is at the bottom of the mountain. Moses is up on the mountain. This is after all of the 10 plagues and such. The institution of the Passover. So God is one of the parties. Israel is another one of the parties. Now we really just need to think a little bit about who Israel is exactly. If you'll notice, as you read through the actual Exodus part of the Exodus, it's not just the Israelites who are leaving. There is also a mixed multitude with them. People who are not Israelite. And so what I'm thinking is, since the Israelites really, how did they identify themselves as Israelites? Well, I think the only way they really could have, because they didn't really have any rules yet. They didn't really have any identity as a nation, a political identity. So it must have just been that circumcision, that sign of being a Jew that God had given to Abraham. That was the sign. And so that's how they knew who they were. And that's how they kept their identity together for the 400 or so odd years that they were in Egypt, both as, they didn't go as slaves, but that's how they ended up. But so that's how they remained a cohesive group of people all that time. But now there's this mixed multitude coming out of Egypt with them. And it's interesting because now God's talking about eating the Passover, and the rule is if you're not circumcised, you can't eat of it. But if you are circumcised, then you can eat of it. And so there we have the first definition of. Well, it's not the first definition. Well, it's just a restatement, I guess, really, that God is kind of reinforcing the idea that circumcision is what makes you Israelite, and so taking part in the Passover is also another identifier. It helps people identify who's who. And so you, as an Israelite, now there are two requirements. You get a circumcision, or you are circumcised, and you eat the Passover. You celebrate the Passover. You remember what God did for you. And so anyone out of that mixed multitude, I imagine, because it doesn't say, the scripture doesn't say otherwise, anyone out of that mixed multitude, and I think that's why, I think that kind of brings me to the point of why are there so many references to the sojourner among you in the Old Testament, in Torah. And I think that's why, because there were a lot. And what do you do with those people? Do they get to hang around? Sure, they can hang around. But then what happens, when it's time to do the Israelite stuff? What happens then? And so God says, well, yeah, they can't do the Israelite stuff unless they become an Israelite. And so that's really, that's really, and the way to become an Israelite. God kind of, I think that passage there pretty much says that. I'll put the passage below. I can't remember exactly the verse number, so but I'll do the citations in the text below. And so that's what makes it so. And I really don't think that there are any other laws that contradict that or modify that in any way. The only troublesome aspect that I could possibly think of is when genealogy starts getting brought into some of these rules. Like during the time of Ezra, when the Israelites were intermarrying and they decided to do a big weeding out. And so I'm not sure how that fits into the whole if you're circumcised, you're an Israelite kind of thesis. I'll have to look some more into that. But nevertheless, at this point in time, meaning the time at Mount Sinai, all you had to do was be circumcised, and you were considered an Israelite, and therefore you could take part in all of the Israelite, whatever was coming down the pike there as part of Torah, you were entitled to take part of that in that. And so I think that's very important, and I think also what a great instance of foreshadowing, of course, because we know that in order to be part of the new Israel, that is, those who belong to Jesus Christ, what do you have to be? You have to be circumcised of the heart, right? Covenant theologians, Presbyterians get it wrong. There's no equivalence between being circumcised and being baptized. The equivalence is two different, it's circumcision, it's just two different kinds. One's a circumcision of the flesh, one's a circumcision of the heart or the spirit. That's the point, ladies and gentlemen, and that's why all of the Exodus points directly towards Christ leading his people, through the wilderness to the promised land. But this in particular foreshadows the gathering in of the Gentiles. That ought to be as clear as day to you. This is a foreshadowing that Christ is going to gather those who weren't called by his name, who didn't know anything about him, and he's going to take them in to be part of his people as long as they believe. And so, that's that. I think that's about all. I think that's about all I've got. So anyway, if you have any questions or comments, please do so in the section below. Like and subscribe, if you will. No, I had another thought, but I'm not going to do it. Hope God blesses you, and we'll be back on the next one.